piano was a sign of wealth. Like if you, and today you can see anybody playing a piano. Like they have pianos in my band class, and then most of these children don't know like that was a sign of wealth. Like that wasn't available to just anybody back then. I mean, like they just think that they can play piano because it is, but it was really like a privilege back then, and it still is. And so those are some of the things that kind of made the Harlem Renaissance.
Now, Lana, within the context of all of this information that you've given us so far, what would you consider to be the most significant aspect of the Renaissance when you see it within the whole total of the history that we've often talked about on this show? For example, we know that during the Harlem Renaissance, Africans were called colored, and then they came up with a new name, new Negro, and all of those aspects of it. And so while we appreciate all of that information that you've given us, and we anticipate some additional information within that range, when we come back, let's talk about some of the reasons that Africans changed from being colored during the Harlem Renaissance to the so-called new Negro. I think you've given us some indication of this new Negro movement. But for the most part, I think, and we appreciate that information that you've given us, and I think you've demonstrated the kind of ability to continue carrying this information forward. And I think one of the things that we would certainly like to hear you say something about Harlem, in the sense that everybody believed that had you not visited Harlem, then you've never really been to New York, and et cetera, and those kinds of ideas and things that you've talked about with us on a number of occasions, and I'm sure that you're very, very in tune with it, you see. And so I think that you're giving us some excellent information, and we look forward to the second part as well as the final part of this show. And let me encourage our audience to that we'll be back following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Alana McLaughlin, and she's talking about the Harlem Renaissance. And during the first segment, she gave us quite a bit of information relative to some of the literature of the Harlem Renaissance. But now I think she has agreed that we should talk about what she considered to be the Harlem Stride style. And of course, Lana, let me not only welcome you back to the second segment, but to sort of delve into this idea of the Harlem Stride style as part of your rendition of some of the important events during the Harlem Renaissance. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Now, if you're just tuning in, I want you to know a few facts before we go on with the show. Alana McLaughlin, born August 27, 2002, and today on the show we're talking about the Harlem Renaissance. Now, I started off the show in the first segment with talking about how Zora Neale Hurston influenced some of the writers of today, like Maya Angelou and other writers, and how it was such a big part of African American history. Now, I know you introduced the show by saying the Harlem Stride style, so we're just going to hop into that. The Harlem Stride style was not some kind of dance like the Harlem Shake. The Harlem Stride style was a way of playing piano. Now, it was a very popular way of playing piano. Like, if you had the Harlem Stride style down, then you were it. I mean, because, and plus, the piano was a sign of wealth. So if you had a piano in your house and was able to play it and was able to do the Harlem Stride style on that piano, you were it. I mean, because most people would think that having a piano in their house just made them seem wealthy. But if you also knew how to play it, then that kind of boosted your itness, like your popularity. And so that's what basically the Harlem Stride style is. Now, also in the first segment, we talked about Jordan Hurston. Now, she was the writer of the famous book, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And it was also made into a movie, which I have seen, starring Holly Berry. And so Jordan Hurston and these other people were very influential in this time. That's when even French-speaking African Americans from the Caribbean and Africa, they came together and they bonded, and that's where they all blossomed, because they helped each other blossom. It wasn't like they were all against each other. I mean, they bonded, they came together, and that's how it started the new Negro movement, or the Harlem Renaissance.
Go on, continue.
Now, let's get into the art of the Harlem Renaissance. Well, arts like music. Now, the trumpet and the piano were both signs of wealth and were both big aspects of the Harlem Renaissance. I fortunately know how to play both. And so, I mean, like people like Louis Armstrong and all these other people, they all bonded together to create the Harlem Renaissance. It's not all about arts, and it's not all about literature. But if I had to say that my favorite part of the my favorite part of the Harlem Renaissance would be, I'd say literature, because no matter how time goes over and over and over, you will always have that literature. And maybe that style of music may die down a little bit, and then it'll just be forgotten. Like maybe rock music might be forgotten in the next millennium, but then you will always have that literature. Like you can never get rid of that literature. I mean, because if the more it influences people, then the more books they will write. And then when it goes all over the years, they will say, I was inspired by the Harlem Renaissance, and that would make people want to look it up. And then that literature would just always be there, because it influenced so many people that say, if you wrote a book about the Harlem Renaissance, and then I want to write a book about the Harlem Renaissance, then my kids would want to write a book about the Harlem Renaissance. Then I'd go over and over and on and on and on and on. And then people would still want to be thinking, what is this Harlem Renaissance stuff that all these people are writing about? And then they'd end up going to Zora Hurston or Maya Angelou, or all these people who were famous writers during the Harlem Renaissance.
Well, Alana, now being in the 5th grade, do you think that most of your classmates have a fairly good idea of what you mean when you talk about the Harlem Renaissance? And if you don't believe that they do, what could be done in order to bring them around to at least seeing your position in reference to the significance of the Harlem Renaissance? I would imagine that many of them might not have ever heard of the Harlem Renaissance.
And if I thought that everybody knew about the Harlem Renaissance, and if everybody knew all this stuff, then I wouldn't be here talking about it, because I want to talk about stuff I want to bring stuff to light. I want more people to know about stuff. Like Martin Luther King, I'm not going to say Martin Luther King was born, he did this. I want to get into the deep facts of his life. Like, I won't tell the stuff that people already know. People already know that he was a civil rights leader. They knew that he did this. They knew that he did that. But then you have to, to really make somebody understand, so you have to go down and down and down and down until you hit gold, basically, something that will intrigue them. And then that's basically why I wanted to do the Harlem Renaissance, because I thought that most people don't know, all they know about the Harlem Renaissance was that it had music, that it was in Harlem. And then that's what most people think, but then it was so much more than that. It inspired the writers of today.
Do you know any writers of today who might have been inspired by the Harlem Renaissance? To give me an opportunity to perhaps get a point of view in.
Like like Maya Angelou. If you were to interview Maya Angelou and ask her what some of her poems or books were about, then she'd say the Harlem Renaissance. I mean, because that's what influenced the African Americans of today. And then some of the music influenced other musicians of today. Like jazz music. Like if you think of jazz singers, then you know that they may not be that influenced of the Harlem Renaissance, but then you have to know that a little bitty piece of them had to be influenced by the New Negro movement or the Harlem Renaissance.
And so this the new Negro movement that gave Africans the real new name from being colored to New Negro was influential enough, you're telling us, to even change the name of the African race from colored to Negro. Now, how did that all come about? We're going to do this second segment. I want you to explain to us how all of that came about. Certainly, you've already indicated that this is a significant movement and that it was literature filled and et cetera. But at the same time, how did this name Negro, colored, and say some statements in reference to about that name as well, some of the organizations that might be associated with that organization, and then tell us from there about this new Negro. And I think we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Alana McLaughlin, and she's giving us some information relative to the literature and other aspects of the Harlem Renaissance. And she has agreed to talk about some of the other movers and shakers of the Renaissance during the final period that we have here. As a matter of fact, Alana, we've tried to give you as free a rein as possible to talk about some of the many, many aspects, it appears, that you've gathered dealing this Harlem Renaissance movement.
Now, before we get into, say, the name changing of African Americans, there's another big aspect of the new Negro movement, well, the Harlem Renaissance. James Weldon Johnson. Now, when you think of James Weldon Johnson, most people don't know who James Weldon Johnson was, why he's important, what he did. He wrote the Negro American national anthem, which is "Lift Every Voice and Sing." Now, I'm sure people saying that has nothing to do with the Harlem Renaissance. That was a big part of the Harlem Renaissance, because let's see, it was the coming together of African Americans. Because they knew they were getting popular and moving on up. They had their own anthem. They had books. They were famous writers, famous musicians, famous jazz bands. They were moving up, and they wanted to bond together to make sure the African Americans got their name out there, that they weren't just former slaves. They weren't just to a random person, that they weren't just former slaves, that they weren't just workers, they weren't just cotton pickers. They were something important. And that's why all African Americans, maybe some are more important than others, and maybe some got more fame than others, but all of them were very, very important. Now, if you had a whole band of famous African Americans and you plucked one out of the group, then it wouldn't really make the Harlem Renaissance, because it was about bonding together. And And if it didn't have anything to do with all African Americans, if it was just an elite group of African Americans, then it wouldn't be the New Negro movement, because that's when we came together. If we were all individuals at that time, then it wouldn't make a movement. Because you can, but they bonded together to make a movement, a big movement. I mean, because one person probably wouldn't make that big of a movement. They had to bond. And that's what made the New Negro movement. And so they bonded over this song. That was their empowerment song, Lift Every Voice and Sing. In the title it says, Lift Every Voice, which is, get your voice out there, get your boom on. That's what that really meant. And so so that's why I want to emphasize the importance of James Whitney Johnson's song. Now let's go back in time a little bit to describe what basically brought upon the name change African Americans from colored to what?
Negroes.
So at first, they started out as slaves. Then they became colored people. Then they became Negroes, then Afro-Americans, and then African Americans, which is what we are today. And so those are some of the many names, and we were called much more than that. Some stuff I can't see on TV, but I mean, we were called much more than that. I mean, we were segregated. We were hated, beaten, killed because of the color of our skin. And so that brought upon a name change, because they said, well, I'm guessing somebody said, well, hey, let's be Negroes instead of being colored. I mean, because colored has no wow to it. I mean, being Negroes at least has some wow about it. I mean, just being colored just means, like, you could be pink, you could be red, you could be orange, but Negroes specified us. I mean, when you say colored, like if I went up to somebody and said, what are colored people, they would say, oh, they can be orange people or pink people or, hey, maybe even purple people. But when you say Negroes, you know exactly who you're talking about. You're talking about me and you, African Americans, colored people. So they want to specify who they were. And over the years, they got more specific about it. I mean, slaves could be anybody. If you weren't white, then you could be a slave, like Native Americans, purple people, orange people, African Americans, black people. But then when you got colored, kind of narrowed it down. I mean, because if you said who was a colored person, I doubt that anybody would say a Caucasian person or a white person. But then when you got Negroes, then you knew exactly who you're talking about. And then when it got from Negroes to Afro-Americans, then you know exactly who they were talking about, even more specific. And then African Americans, it's not like you can't just be an African American. There are African Americans. You can't just be alone being African American, because you have to bond together to make an African American. And so that's what. And then some other events brought upon the name change, like. Nobody just said, oh, let's change our name because we feel like changing the name. Stuff brought upon name change, like, say, like, since the Harlem Renaissance started in 1919, what are some stuff that happened before 1919? Like, in 1912, the Titanic sank. And other important events happened before 1919, and other important events happened after 1934, like the First World War. And other important stuff happened after the Harlem Renaissance, which ended in 1934. So, like, even this year, we have our first African-American president. And so those are some of the stuff that brought upon the name change. And I feel as if in the future, we might change our name once again. And then again. And again, you don't know how many times we can change our name. But that's just some of the stuff that brought upon the great name change.
And this is your information in reference to the Harlem Renaissance, and you think that young people like yourself should be much more aware of the significance of all of these things that you're talking about. I mean,
everybody should be aware of it, not just African Americans or colored people. I mean, everybody should be aware of it, because no matter if you're black, white, pink, purple, it affected everybody. It didn't just affect African Americans. I mean, because if you went up to, like, I know there's not purple people in the world, but if you saw somebody that was purple and you asked them, do you think you were affected by the Harlem Renaissance? Yeah, because of the music they listen to today, or in band, the instruments they play, or if they're pianists, the piano that they play was all a part of the Harlem Renaissance. Like the Harlem Stride style, they were affected by this. Everybody was affected by it. It wasn't just African Americans, the African American community, it was everybody.
And do you see any relationship between the kind of music that was played during the Renaissance and the kind of music that you listen to today?
Now, say the trumpet, you can look up any Rachel Ferrell song, and I'm sure you will find even if you don't hear a little bit of trumpet in that. And she's a famous jazz singer. She had to be influenced by the Harlem Renaissance, because that's when trumpets became famous. And if you look up say a Beyonce song, I'm sure you can find a piano version of that. And what was that inspired by? The Harlem Renaissance.
And so the Harlem Renaissance has a much greater impact upon American history than
it didn't just start and stop. I mean, if you start something, you can't just end it when you feel like ending it. It goes on and on and on and on and on.
And such organizations like the NAACP and civil rights organizations and et cetera, all of those are in a real sense influenced
by the Harlem Renaissance, the new Negro movement. Because the NAACP, when you think of NAACP, you think of civil rights leaders. They were much more than that. They helped in the Harlem Renaissance. Like some of those famous people during the Harlem Renaissance were influenced by some of the people who in the NAACP, the music they listen to today, was influenced by what? The new Negro movement.
And Du Bois and all of those individuals
W.E.B. Du Bois
played a significant role in it. And, and you think that the more people learn about it, the more tolerant that they could be toward one another, and et cetera. And you're doing everything that you possibly can in order to try to spread the word.
And before we end off the show today, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Alan Leroy Locke, who basically inspired the new Negro movement and who was basically the cause of it. I mean, because of all his works in the African American community, and I want to thank him for that.
Now, where was he from now?
He was, I'm not sure actually.
But you know that he is one of the most significant aspects of the movement. And I say that primarily because when I first started college, I was also told that same idea, and I was wondering where in the world did you get that idea from? And certainly let me, during this last half a minute, Alana, thank you for bringing that excellent information by. And I think that when you first approached this topic, I think I was somewhat skeptical in reference to it, and I felt that I really ought not to deal with you in reference to this, because it would be quite an embarrassment if you were not as good as you claim that you are. And I think that you demonstrated in a real sense that you gave us some excellent information. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.